How's it going? So we got some more bad news coming out of the United States. Yesterday, there was another shooting involving a black man under some unfortunate circumstances. Apparently, there was a domestic disturbance, and the police were called. They showed up, and uh, Jacob Blake was apparently helping break up the fight that was going on, and somehow along the way, in the middle of trying to figure that out, um, police were trying to talk to him, and he didn't seem to want to talk to them. It's hard to say what happened because no one has any body cams in this part of Wisconsin, so we won't really get any up close and personal on anything, unfortunately. Although I imagine they're probably going to have body cams instituted pretty quick. Um, so at any rate, he starts to walk around to the front of his vehicle, and the cops are trying to get him to stop, and apparently they tase him, and he just keeps on moving, and then it leads to him getting shot, right? So, but this is what the Washington Post, or one of the articles from the Washington Post, more or less, has to say about it. Eugene Robinson writes, the Black Lives Matter protests must continue because some people, especially some police officers, still act as if black lives are worthless. Witness what happened Sunday to Jacob Blake. Once again, a cell phone video recorded by an onlooker tells a horrifying story. At the corner of 40th and 28th in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a black man identified as as Blake, 29, walks around a parked car. Trailing him are two police officers, their guns drawn, aimed at his back. The scene is surreal even before it turns deadly. The officers' wire tense. Blake continuing on his way, head slightly down, leaning forward with the air of a man trying to shut out a horrible distraction. Blake opens the driver's side door. One of the officers pulls on the back of Blake's shirt in an attempt to restrain him. Blake gets in the car, and the officers, one of whom is still holding onto his shirt, shoots him 7 times. So he doesn't mention the taser or anything like that. He just says he's just trying to walk away, which probably shouldn't do anyway. And then sort of leads to him getting shot. Now, I'm definitely not in agreement or happy with any of this that happened, but I probably want to still ask, if he would have just stood there and talked to them, would he still be alive if he had not tried to get around to his car? So, and then we come to Fox News and what they have to say about it. So, I mean, in an interview with Michael Crump, I can't remember his last name, at any rate, he says that, according to the cops, yeah, they tased him and stuff. So that gets left out of the other article. And now it sort of puts Fox in a position where the left-wing media will say, oh, look at Fox News blaming the victim once again. So there's your media propaganda. And now riots, of course, sparked up again all over the place because of it. It didn't take very long for that to kick into overdrive with social media. Everyone knew about it as soon as it happened, and riots were on in full force once again on multiple cities across the United States over this. So that's where we are now from where we were 3 months ago with the inception of the Black Lives Matter and Antifa Rising Together movement. That started with George Floyd. So, and now, of course, I imagine most people watching this know, that there's 2 different reports from the coroner and then one from a private coroner named Michael Baden. So the original statement made by the county coroner says that his death was likely a combination of factors, including being restrained by police, his underlying health conditions, which included coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease, and potential intoxicants in his system. So the combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police's underlying health conditions and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. A statement from the medical examiner. So, and of course that led to Chauvin's 2nd and 3rd degree murder charges that he's currently facing down with right now. So to get a little bit deeper into the 2 different reports that were given concerning Michael Baden being involved, we already know what the coroner says, the county coroner. Michael Baden comes in, and it's interesting to note that he also did the autopsy for Eric Garner, who is another black gentleman who died 5 years ago now, and he was put in a chokehold that resulted in his death. So I don't know exactly where he comes in and what his report is on that. I can't quite find it, but the chokehold gets added in as the cause of death, but it's also stated that it leads to asthma attack and like a heart arrhythmia or something like that causes his death. So again, you kind of have this Michael Baden coming along and helping alter the cause of death once again, which is kind of interesting. So I just thought I'd remark on that, because you don't find in some of the resources all of the cases that Michael Baden was involved in assisting with the autopsy on, or conducting his own independent autopsy, I should say. So Baden said he died as a result of the compression on his neck and back from the officer, which interfered with the blood flow in his breathing. George Floyd died because he needed breath, said Ben Crump, a lawyer representing Floyd's family. He needed a breath of air. Okay, and so the cops wouldn't have thought that because he was still talking all the way through it. So whether or not he had a reaction from mixing uppers and downers, or if he just straight up had a heart attack and died, he couldn't get air even though he was still talking, and so it was kind of a confusing situation to be in. But nonetheless, they should have went to resuscitation techniques or done something else, gotten off of him and done something else. That's all 2020. I mean, the body cam is out there now too, and we'll talk about that as we get along with the information that I want to go over. So I'll just hold that off for then. So the Hennepin County Medical Office, as we just said, stated that it had other conditions, including arteriosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease. So that's the hardening of the arteries, and this is like when your heart has built up scar tissue on it, and it just has a hard time working. So also the fentanyl intoxication and methamphetamine use, as we just stated earlier too, or whatever. So Biden suggests that no further testing would be necessary, since there's no more pressure being applied to him. So it's kind of a strange thing to say when he says that that's what killed him. But Baden also said that he could find no underlying conditions that contributed to Floyd's death. So he completely contradicts what the coroner says about him having hardened arteries and already having an issue with his heart. So there Baden is again giving the a complete opposite report for what happened, or at least, misleading from what the original report is, claiming that he was a healthy young man. Sorry, that's Crump stating that. And Crump's interesting. He's now involved in Jacob Blake's case already too, I think. I think that's going to be a lawyer for them. It's been a pretty good year for Mr. Crump. So, okay. So that trails me off into another left-leaning report. So we know how George Floyd died. It wasn't from drugs, right? So they got to push on that. This is also an opinion piece. It's important to note that, because really, when you start looking at it, that's all it really comes across as. Of course, he has his credibility card that he's a neuroscientist who specializes in how humans respond to psychoactive drugs. But when you read the things that he says, it doesn't really seem to matter that that's his profession. So he goes on to say, my heart sank when I read the prosecutor's criminal complaint against Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who was charged with killing George Floyd. It suggests that drugs were one factor contributing to his death. Not again, I thought. I have seen the drug-crazed Negro script trotted out too many times when a police officer kills a black person. I'd like examples, I'm sure. Yeah, sure, but I don't know, whatever. So, and it could happen again in the Floyd case. In fact, it already is. So, what does he go on to say? His analysis of the toxicology report is that drugs could not have contributed to his death, nor could it have made him crazed. In other words, the drugs didn't make him act so violently that lethal force was necessary. And I don't believe that technically lethal force was actually applied. I believe that Chauvin was doing what he felt he needed to do to hold him down, maybe the size difference or something, but I'm not sure that he knew he was killing him. Because like I say, he was still talking and stuff. So despite the claim one way or the other that he meant to kill him, I'd say he was negligent in his death, but I wouldn't necessarily put it on any first or second degree murder. In fact, that's one of the things being stated right now is that second degree murder is a reach, and they might not get any satisfaction because they're trying for something more than what they should get. So who knows how that's going to work out. It's not going to be so good probably either way for someone. So he goes on to state that Mr. Floyd had a negligible amount of drugs in his system, 19 nanograms per millimeter of meth, which is, so a heavy dosage from what I can understand is between 50 and 150 nanograms. So at 19 nanograms, he's kind of on an average dose at that time. And 2.9 nanograms per milliliter of THC, the major psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. Those numbers suggest he hadn't used them in at least several hours, maybe a day. Okay, so he already suggests that the THC and the meth couldn't have contributed to his death on their own. And yet he goes on to say, nor would marijuana have stoked violence. Its primary effects are relaxation, sedation, euphoria, and increased hunger. In some cases, it is true very high THC concentrations can cause mild paranoia and visual and auditory distortions, but even these effects are rare and usually only seen in marijuana novices. And so, I mean, he's suggesting that the THC should have kept him calm, but he also says that there's not enough in him to make any effect on that. And when you go to how much cannabis is needed to really affect somebody, an article published by the Denver Post states that a Johns Hopkins University study from 1995 found that 4 puffs of smokable marijuana with 1.75% THC, which is actually 17.5%, that's just their minimum measurement, translates to 57 nanograms. And so that's just a little bit. And then people with their average amount, you're getting close to 100 nanograms. 1 to 200 are considered normal. So the marijuana couldn't have even been affecting him at that point. Then he goes on to say that he also had 11 nanograms of fentanyl in his blood. That number in itself doesn't tell us much. Immediately after a person dies, the blood concentration of fentanyl increases significantly, which is true. So knowing only the post-mortem amount does not tell us about Mr. Floyd's level of intoxication before death. So it's a little bit of a mislead, because one thing that's for sure is that he didn't have less than 11 nanograms of fentanyl in his system at the time. Your body doesn't produce fentanyl, and so he must have had at least 11, if not more, nanograms of fentanyl in his blood. Now he also goes on to state that because he was on fentanyl, he shouldn't have been charged up. He should have been relaxed instead. So when we go on to fentanyl and post-mortem forensic toxicology, this was written back in 2010 by Robert Palmer. But basically, the results and conclusions to do with the amount in the blood. It's true that post-mortem blood fentanyl concentrations do not correlate directly with the ante-mortem blood concentrations, so prior to death. Without adequate evaluation of kinetic data, investigative information, and consideration of post-mortem changes, misinterpretation of post-mortem fentanyl results is likely. So it does say that you can't get a true, reading on how much is pre-metabolized and how much is in the blood, but like I say, if there's at least 11, then there could be at least 11, if not more. So now he also states that the amount of fentanyl in his body doesn't tell us much, and that it might not or shouldn't have anything to do with his death. Basically trying to say that it's too low. But if you come over to the EMCDDA, which is a European drug publication, I had to use it because it was hard to find, numbers anywhere else in the way that I wanted them presented. But At any rate, it states that the estimated lethal dose of fentanyl in humans is 2 milligrams, which isn't very much. But at the same time, it's quite a lot. So people wear a patch of fentanyl for therapeutic reasons, and it's a 40 milligram patch, but you wear it for 3 days to be dispersed over that time. So 2 milligrams in you hard and fast is enough to cause problems. It says 10 to 20 nanograms is used for anesthesia, but blood concentrations of approximately 7 milligrams or greater have been associated with fatalities where polysubstance use was involved. So 7 milligrams or more mixed with another substance is enough to cause fatality, and he had 11. So it's a good amount more, whether or not you consider the amounts to be a lot by their number. It's still considerably more when mixed with another substance. Now, the effects of mixing uppers and downers, so it says taking stimulants, which would be the methamphetamine, with opioids, which would be the fentanyl, changes the body's homeostasis. The opioids decrease your heart rate, but stimulants increase it. So this could cause heart dysrhythmias and heart failure. And if you already had a bad heart, which the coroner says, the original coroner says, despite what Baden says, then it stands to reason that an overdose was the cause of death first and foremost. But at the same time, obviously police procedures are going to change forever now. So they're going to have to come up with a way when someone is saying that they can't breathe and whatnot, that they're going to be able to deal with that in order to avoid another death like this, because the way the public's responding, you certainly don't want that to happen. So it's a pretty sticky situation that everyone's been put in this situation. But it brings me back to Michael Baden and some of the cases that he's been involved with, because he doesn't really have the best reputation with his position. He's said things and then retracted them, and he's also potentially lied under oath. So one of the things that stands out to me was that he was the chief medical examiner in the city of New York from 78 to 79, so only a year, but was removed from his position by New York City Mayor Ed Cook at the time. And Cook said that he had received complaints about his work, including memos from District Attorney Robert Morgenthau and City Health Commissioner Ronaldo Ferrer, documenting their criticism of Baden for sloppy record keeping, poor judgment, and a lack of cooperation. So, in 1979, Baden's one-time lawyer, Robert Tannenbaum, defended his autopsy methods while acknowledging his lack of cooperation with the New York establishment, which did result in Baden being awarded $100,000 in a wrongful termination suit. So he managed to win his case on the wrongful termination, because those things probably weren't documented well enough to actually really say this is why we fired him, so they should have done their due diligence on that. But bear in mind, this is back in the 70s, before a lot of law was really brought in around labor rights and things like that, like it is today. So later on in his career, let's see, he was deputy medical examiner for Suffolk County, but was dismissed again for making inappropriate comments about how to commit the perfect murder. He goes on to defend himself on that, but even though the decision was rescinded to let him go, as it went on, he still decided to stay away. He just accepted that he should leave instead anyway. He currently still has a private forensic pathology consulting practice, which is why he keeps getting brought in to all of these basically white cop on black murder. So he gets involved with that quite a bit. He gets involved in some other pretty interesting cases as well that we'll talk about. So trying to find stuff that I thought was more important. Notable cases. So he was involved with the O.J. Simpson case. And before that, actually, I should bring up, too, that he was also part of the committee who was looking after JFK's autopsy. So he's been involved with quite a few high-profile cases for quite a long time. So anyway, in his O.J. Simpson case, he claims that Nicole Brown was standing unconscious when her throat was slashed. which is a claim that he later disowned. And the purpose of the claim was to dispute the theory that Brown was the intended target. The prosecution argued that Brown was murdered first and the intended target because the soles of her feet didn't have any blood on them, despite the large amount of blood at the crime scene, and that she was unconscious when her throat was cut because she had very few defensive wounds. At the subsequent civil trial, the following year, he disowned that claim and admitted that it was absurd to think that someone would stand still without moving their feet while their throat is being slashed and not fight back. So he rescinds his own comments that were used in testimony. He also claimed that Ron Goldman remained unconscious and fought with his assailant for at least 10 minutes with a severed jugular vein. I was trying to find information on how long it would take for you to die from an injury to a jugular vein, but depending on how deep it is, how many jugulars were cut, because there's actually 2 on each side, which I can't really find information on, is how fast you're going to die from that. But under an adrenaline situation fighting for your life, I would say that 10 minutes, you probably wouldn't necessarily make it that long. I contacted a doctor at my clinic today, but he wasn't able to phone me back right away, so I won't find out till tomorrow what he has to say about it. Tried phoning an ambulance, and they weren't able to tell me either with their first aid exactly how long it could take. So at any rate, Baden claimed that he misunderstood the question, but the Goldman's attorney alleged that he said it because the defense paid him to do so. So as part of the rigmarole of going through the court system, he was accused of being paid to make certain statements. And it was also alleged that Baden knowingly gave false testimony because he knew that Ron Goldman's blood was found inside O.J. Simpson's Bronco, despite Goldman never having an opportunity within his lifetime to be in Simpson's car. So that was, one of the things that was alluded on that would have proved the murder, like why would the blood be in the Bronco kind of thing. So that slipped through. But I'd like to comment too on this, that, that was a really sticky situation for America at the time. It was on the news every day. I remember it when I was a kid. You couldn't get away from the O.J. Simpson trial. It was constantly being televised almost all day. And, one of the big concerns was that if he was guilty, that there would be more riots to follow, because the Rodney King incident had happened just years before that. And so they just got out of one riot in LA, and they didn't want to start another riot based on, conviction of someone black or something happened to someone black. So essentially what I think, in my opinion, happened is they kind of knew that he did it. And so in order to punish him, but at the same time not start a riot, they drug it through court as long as they could. They made him sell every last bit of his memorabilia in order to pay for his court fees. And so they basically made him broke. If he's going to walk on what they figured probably happened, then he was going to be poor by the time he did it. This eventually gets him thrown back in prison anyway, because he actually goes around and starts trying to steal some of his old memorabilia back. And that ends up getting him put back in jail. So it's funny how things work out sometimes. So, okay, O.J. Simpson, he was also involved with the Phil Spector case. Now, Phil Spector, big movie shot music guy in the music industry. And so in the 2007 case that put Phil in jail, because he was out on $1 million bail for about 3 or 4 years before he actually went to court. Baden testified on his new theory on the death of the music producer's victim. He sought to provide an alternative explanation for blood on the victim's jacket. When asked by a prosecutor if he had any conflicts of interest, Baden replied, "None that I can think of," which is not really a no and not really a yes. When you say something like that, you're leaving yourself in the middle, really. And it was later revealed that his wife was one of Spector's main attorneys. So, of course, there was a conflict of interest. I suppose that maybe it can't be proven that his wife spoke to him about that or not, but, it definitely doesn't look good on him. And he was also involved at the request of the Michael Brown's family to conduct a 4-hour autopsy, which really didn't, I don't think, really show anything too different from what the coroner's official report was. And then even more interesting, he was also involved with Jeffrey Epstein's autopsy where he states that it looked like a murder. So New York Chief Medical Examiner Barbara Simpson's conclusion that his death was a suicide, asserting that the three fractures in Epstein's neck were more consistent with homicide by strangulation and rarely seen by suicide in a hanging. Baden has stated that the autopsy points to homicide. So, and of course, that now brings us to George Floyd being one of his most important autopsies to date, where again, like we're talking about, he manages to give a conflicting opinion, and it's it's resulted in all these protests and riots, hundreds of millions of dollars in damage so far, about 30 deaths in and around the riots themselves. And so if he's lying, then he's the one that's responsible for all this. All of this stuff might not have happened had the official cause been overdose. But, it still doesn't look good the way it went down. There was no resuscitation, even with, him looking like he definitely had passed when he began to lose fluids. So it's quite the thing that we're in. So now we're at another one. Well, more than that, we've also got Rayshard Brooks is a big deal, being shot by police this year, and then the Wendy's subsequently being burned down. In new news, this just came out today because of this, actually. So Breonna Taylor ended up having a big march behind her. Well, not really a march. It was more like an armed request to have all the information surrounding her death in a month and make a decision on the officers involved. So that's by John Grandmaster Jay Johnson. He's the one who led that to the courthouse and stated that, yeah, we want results in a month. Some interesting things to note when these guys were marching to the courthouse that day was that there's footage of one of them harassing motor vehiclists that are just going about their day for money, saying pay us reparations. So they're kind of being aggressive with their weapons. And he makes this statement that we are well armed, well trained, and don't mess around. We're the not messing around crew. So I don't want to swear too much, but and so yeah, they're really well trained, etc. And yet one of them managed to ignite their weapon when they were in rally and injured 3 people. I seen a TikTok video of him explaining it later, the leader here, stating that, oh, well, it was an older shotgun and there was no safety on it, so, it just went off and it got 3 people, but not a big deal kind of thing is what he was saying. And I'm thinking to myself, if there's no safety on it, why is there even one chambered? That is your safety, is you don't have anything in it, right? So a lot of nonsense around that. But at any rate, it's led to the police in Kentucky stating that the investigation will remain ongoing and that their office does not plan to make an announcement this week. And so that's almost a month exactly from when Johnson here was requesting to have all the information laid out. 25th of July, tomorrow's the 25th of August, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that tomorrow. I'm going to be watching the news to see what goes on there, if these guys are actually going to do anything or not. Yeah, the death of Eric Garner. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Like I say, it was also Michael Baden that was involved in the secondary autopsy involved with this, and basically a chokehold is what came out of it from the evidence used against Parishino, and his attorney maintains that he was using a seatbelt choke, which isn't the same thing because you're just using one arm. You're not trying to manipulate the head and the neck at the same time to put a proper chokehold on. So I'm not exactly sure, like I say, at what point he intervened. I can't find anything on that. That's what he said, but he's definitely adding more information to something and making things more difficult, right? And this involved Black Lives Matter rising up over this incident, really. Another difficult thing that we've come across is that there's a law that they're trying to pass called the George Floyd bill, which would seek to reconstruct police procedure for arrests, so using certain techniques that could be resulting in excessive force. But that's been blocked now too, so I imagine that's not going to help certain members of the community feel too good. They're going to be upset about that, as they are with many other things that keep happening. Which brings me to this. Like, I don't think that this is going to happen, but at the same time, we've watched 3 months of rioting go on now. Like I say, hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. Black businesses had been lost. Black people were lost, including Officer David Dorn. And so, you know, it brings in the question as to which Black lives actually matter when you say Black Lives Matter, because it really doesn't seem to care about anything other than its political ends being met. And to anyone who knows, it's admittedly a Marxist organization. Its founders all claim to be well trained in the verbiage of Marxism, and you know, their political agenda tends to stand out above actual. We just want police reform, and I think that a lot of people know that. So, but that pushes us along to where we are now, with more incidents happening besides some of the ones that I've just showed you, and that's just a tiny little look at it. And so we've still got roughly 2 months until election. So how many more things are going to happen until then to really boost this political narrative that's going on surrounding it? Because the Democrats, of course, are heavily relying on this stuff to get them in. So if it does continue to escalate, I would say once Trump is secured, because he's probably going to win. I mean, it's a high chance that he's going to win. If he's not, well, shut my mouth, but we'll see come November. But in the event that he gets in and he's only in for one more term, if this violence doesn't stop and it just keeps going on, I would suggest then that there's a potential of the Insurrection Act being put into use, which means really bad things for everybody who's been protesting and rioting. It's kind of funny to me that, you know, they said that Trump's the big fascist and that he's going to bring in martial law. And, you know, everything that they've done since then has kind of brought that on themselves, in my opinion. Like, if you weren't, you know, winging rockets or fireworks at cops for 80 days in Portland, you know, harming them with hammers and all the other things that have gone on, none of this escalation would actually happen. So they've kind of started it, in my opinion, and they're the ones that keep it going too. So it's good. We're going to be in for a lot of rough times with all this stuff still. And I wanted to go back in time on it because, like I say, when you get into this, I mean, how responsible is Michael Baden for the statements that he makes when it comes to these things happening? And, you know, had he said something else, could have this been avoided? It doesn't matter now because we're in it. So now we have to see what's going to eventually stop it. And, you know, who knows what that is. So at any rate, that's my report and my thoughts on where we are now and where we're going with the current racial tensions. And we just had a new Conservative Party leader elected. O'Toole got in. And I'll be looking forward to doing a little bit of a report on him tomorrow, and just kind of going over the things that he said and what the government might look like with him in it, or at least the conservative side of the government with him in. And of course, he's talking about a potential election coming up in September as well, depending on the vote of no confidence. So he might end up being prime minister depending on how things go. So we'll definitely have a look at him for a little bit too. So thanks for tuning into this. It didn't go as smoothly as I thought it would, but I'm still new at all of this and practicing. This is the first time I've ever used the dual screen thing, and it's a little bit different to me. So thanks for bearing with me anyway, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you tomorrow with another update on some of the news going on. All right, peace out.